evening, everyone. Welcome to the Algonquin College Speaker Series. Tonight, our guest is Larry Vance, who is a retired Transportation Safety Board investigator here in Canada. He also is a consultant and continues to work with plane crash investigations. Tonight's topic is his new book, MH370, Mystery Solved. It is the story of the March 8th, 2014 Malaysian Flight 370 crash, which left 239 people on board dead, disappeared literally into the darkness of the night in the Indian Ocean. The crash has been described in some cases as the mystery of the century in aviation. And through tonight's topic, we'll hear from Larry his own investigation and what he has been able to determine that he believes was the cause of the crash and some of the aftermath of that investigation. So welcome to Pembroke, Larry.
Yeah,
Great
I'm
to have you here.
pleased to be here, and what a wonderful crowd. I've talked to a few already. It's going to be fun.
All right, so we're going to start with, because I think this is important, your credentials, and in particular, I'd like you to speak about the Swiss Air crash, which many of you will remember off the coast of Nova Scotia, Peggy's Cove in 1998, and you were one of the lead investigators into that crash. So how long have you been involved with plane crash investigations, and talk about Swiss Air?
Right, plane crash investigations, I started doing that full-time in 1984 with what was the Canadian Aviation Safety Board, now the Transportation Safety Board of Canada, and I'm so pleased to see one of my former co-workers, Richard Newcomb, here tonight. I wasn't expecting that, so it's great to have him here. He can keep me honest. Yeah. And
good things happen when you come to Pembroke.
That's right. Yeah, all the good people move to Pembroke.
That's right. That's right.
So anyway, yeah, I started off as a pilot way back in 1967. I just turned 70 years old. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah. on the Swiss Air
coming
accident,
to Swiss Air.
Yeah, let's get to Swiss Air.
Yeah.
You've got a model of Swiss Air right here. But that investigation, the reason I want to bring that up is because it speaks to your credentials, but it also speaks to what the investigators in the Malaysian crash determined was the cause in some respects. So I want you to talk about Swiss Air and the cause of that crash and what the investigation looked like.
Right. One of the things that gives me credibility, and I will say we don't have much time, so I can't convince you, but I have a lot of credibility. I've been around a long time. I've done hundreds of investigations. Richard can attest to that. And so I know of what I speak. We did Swiss Air 111. I was a big player in Swiss Air 111 as the deputy investigator in charge. I wrote the report, and it was a fantastic crew and a really good investigation. It was a crash into water. So that's one of the parallels. I've done a few other investigations of airplanes crashing into water, but that's the big one. Swiss Air 111 crashed because it was on fire and the pilots lost control of it. It was at night. It went into the ocean in an uncontrolled way. It basically crashed. This is an MD-11. The Malaysia airplane was similar to this, but it didn't have this tail engine. The Swiss Air went in like this. It was about 110 degrees over with the nose down about like that. It was going about 300 and a bit knots. Very fast. It went into the ocean. The Malaysian official investigation says, and they still say, that that airplane ran out of fuel, that it went out of control, and it crashed in a high-speed descent with the nose down and broke apart into millions of pieces, what would be millions of pieces. That's their official stance to this day. That did not happen. And in the investigation that we did, me and my partners, completely unconnected to the official investigation. We did our own investigation, and the results came out in this book. We know that the Malaysian airplane crashed in a much different way. The reason we know that is because of one of the reasons we know that is because of the experience from Swiss Air 111. When an airplane goes into the water at high speed, uncontrolled, it goes in, it leads with the nose. What happens is, if this is the ocean surface, this water is not compressible, but it's fluid. If the airplane hits into water at high speed like this, picture it stopped right here, and then picture it going another few inches, and then another few inches, centimeters, into the water. The nose does not have the capacity to absorb that. What happens is that the nose breaks up, It just basically gives way, and the water starts to invade into the fuselage of the airplane. Just goes inside like it would into this is an empty vessel. Basically, it's an empty container. As the water goes in, it starts to create tremendous forces inside. The pressure of the air and then the water invading into the fuselage starts to break the airplane apart from the inside out. And the hydrodynamic forces explode the airplane almost instantly. If it's going at that speed, and the Malaysian one, in their theory, the Malaysian one was going even faster. If you do the mathematics of 300, and I chose for the book 360 or 80 knots, I forget, 600 and some feet a second. This airplane is 209 feet long. It would take 1/3 of a second for that entire airplane to be torn apart from the inside out. 1/3 of a second. 1/3 of a second is one blink of an eye. If you blink your eyes 3 times, that takes 1 second. If you do the mathematics alone at that speed, it would take one blink of an eye for this part of the airplane to hit the water in the same way that this part. And the airplane fuselage, being empty, explodes from the inside out. Once it reaches the wings are also hollow. They would explode from the inside out. Once it reaches the flaps on the back of the wings, they're also hollow, and they explode from the inside out. And we saw all this in Swissair. Jamie, I don't know when you want me to stop and you to start.
I'll just, you're doing a great job. You're a much better explainer of this topic than I.
I wouldn't want you to do it. I'll do it.
That's right. The one piece I just want to pick up on, and then we'll move on from Swissair, is you literally reconstructed that plane. How many pieces of wreckage were there from the Swissair crash?
We estimate 2 million pieces. The way we got to 2 million is, for Swissair, we recovered 98% of the airplane. You know how we know that? Because we know how much the airplane weighed going in. We know how much it weighed of the material that we took out. Come to 98% of the airplane by weight that we recovered. It was 2 million pieces. We know that because most of the pieces were small enough to put on this. Now, there were some big pieces, the landing gear, the engines, and so on stayed together, but the majority of the airplane was in pieces that were small enough to put on this table, and many of them, you could put 100 pieces of it on this table. They were that much destroyed. And so we had 2 million pieces of MD-11. We put them in boxes, big cardboard boxes, and built a big hangar to put them in. We had 700 boxes full of little pieces, like little puzzle pieces. And we took the important ones and we built the front end of the airplane up back because that's where the fire started. But we know how many pieces we had altogether because we counted the pieces in several of the boxes and multiplied by 700. It came to 2 million.
So I wanted to raise that because I think that plays into your theory about,
for sure.
You know, that what happened or what could not have happened in this case.
That's important, Jimmy.
Okay, so March 8th, 2014, Malaysian Flight 370 leaves Kuala Lumpur on its way to Beijing around midnight, a little bit past that. But 1:20 in the morning, something happens, and that's the first sign that there's trouble on this flight. I'll let you pick up the story from there.
Yeah, what happened was after about 30 minutes into the flight, a little bit more than 30 minutes, I think, the airplane, the Malaysia flight, was traveling at nighttime toward Beijing. In the air traffic control center, there's different airspaces that are designated along the route. Over there, you start in Malaysian airspace, you transition into airspace of Vietnam, and then whatever's past that until you finally get to Beijing. They make up electronically waypoints to take you there more or less on a straight line. As the airplane was approaching the transition between Malaysian airspace and Vietnamese airspace, it disappeared from radar. I'm going to tell you what happened is that the pilot, now some people say there was a fire, there was a bomb, there was this or that, or hijackers or whatever. What actually happened was that the pilot turned the transponder off. The transponder is one single switch. You turn the switch from on to standby or off, and the airplane would disappear electronically from the radar screens. So the air traffic, it would disappear, gone. Now, the guy in what happened was the controller in Vietnam, in Malaysia, that's not my airplane, so he just, off he goes. The guy who's expecting the airplane knows that the the clearance that he got wouldn't conflict with any of his traffic, so he's not concerned too much about him at that point. He's waiting for him to call and check in, because as soon as you go past that waypoint, you know, Vietnam airspace, whatever, this is Malaysia 370, I'm here, watch me. That didn't happen. But he didn't notice for some 18 minutes. He's just waiting, you know, there's nothing to cue him into that, because there's nothing on his screen, nothing comes up. What happened was that the airplane turned quite vigorously around and started to travel in a totally different direction. And it went in between the airspace of Vietnam and Malaysia, and it made a few little turns here and there. We know this afterwards because they were able to figure it out from primary radar. But it took basically evasive action at that altitude, and it stayed out of sight, out of mind, until finally it made one final turn down out over the ocean and flew for another 6 or 7 hours until it was in the southern Indian Ocean, where there's no place to land. It had to have ended up in the water. That's how they know for sure that it ended up in the water. But that's basically the structure of what they were dealing with. When they finally discovered the airplane was missing, it took a bit of a Keystone Cops effort to get everybody together to say, I mean, who's expecting this, you know? And eventually they figured out the airplane was missing. Eventually they started a search. They started a search in the area where the airplane disappeared, which was in the water below where it was. But eventually, after a few days and a couple of weeks, whatever, they finally figured out that the airplane had gone to the southern Indian Ocean and had disappeared down there.
But it's a massive search area. 120,000 square kilometers is how big it is. The only reason they even know that it's in that space is because there is one way to track that airplane that, in your theory, the pilot didn't consider.
Yeah, what the pilot did, he tried to make the airplane disappear by turning this transponder off. He also shut down other communication systems in the airplane. There's a system called ACARS. It's almost like works in the background. It's an automatic thing. And it's used for the people on the ground to send messages to the airplane back and forth, and you know, weather and stuff like that the pilots don't have to actively participate in. It did that on a regular basis every half hour. He shut that off. That's not easy to shut off. You don't just turn off one switch for that. You got to go through a procedure to turn that off. And he turned it off, but by the grace of God, the guy did not have in his head the fact that he couldn't turn off one aspect of it, which was there was a monitoring system set up for the engines, where the engines reported their serviceability back to the manufacturer in these 30-minute intervals. And that system got left on because he didn't electronically know how, or even know how to turn it off, or he didn't even know it was there, is my opinion. And so he left that on. Now that's not used to track where the airplane is, but through the great magic of today's electronics, with the satellite signal and so on, they were able to extract from, this is quite a bit afterwards, this is weeks afterwards, they were able to extract data from these pings, what they call pings or handshakes. Maybe you heard about the handshakes, there were 7 of them. And they were able to calculate, based on time and distance back and forth between this satellite and the airplane, that the airplane in fact flew a track to the southern Indian Ocean. That's how they know it went down there. And other than that, they would have had no idea where to look. And that was just by coincidence that the pilot didn't know that. There's other theories. This is not my theory, I know this to be true, but let's call it my theory, that this is what happened, is that the pilot failed to get all the electronic gizmos turned off, and this connection stayed there.
Okay. Your theory is that this was a criminal act, that
Indeed.
the pilot deliberately flew this plane out into the Indian Ocean and tried to essentially land it onto the ocean floor, rather than what the official investigation theory is, which
Right.
it was a deep dive, nose first plane crash after the plane essentially was unpiloted and ran out of fuel.
Right. Let
Tell
me
us how
tell
you got there.
Let me tell you the difference between where the official investigation got to and where we got to. Me and my team. There's 2 others with me. They're even older than I am, believe it or not. But we've been at it for a long, long time. Anyway, the official investigation left open the theory that they don't know why the airplane did what it did at the 30-minute mark. They don't know why the transponder went off. They don't know why the airplane turned and went in different directions, and they don't know why it got. And there's a number of theories, right? You've heard them all, I'm sure. There's a fire on board, there's hijackers, there's Martians, there's this and that, and you know, it flew into a black hole, it depressurized, all kinds of different theories. There's also the theory, it's not mine alone, but there's also the theory that this had to be an intervention by the pilots because of the sophistication of it. It takes a lot of work to get this to happen. And it would take a huge number of coincidences for it to happen some other way. But anyway, they say that the airplane then became unpiloted. There was nobody flying the airplane, but it stayed on autopilot. And it flew all those hours down there until at high altitude, eventually it runs out of fuel. And when it runs out of fuel, it goes into an uncontrolled descent. And the uncontrolled descent leads it to be a high-speed dive into the ocean, and it ends up like Swiss Air ended up with massive, massive numbers of pieces and disappears into the ocean. And a few of those pieces float to the coastline of Africa eventually, but the rest of the pieces become non-buoyant and they sink to the bottom. That's their theory. That's not correct. That's not correct at all. It never made any sense from the very beginning. Then what happened is that the first piece showed up on the shore of Africa. Before that, we're talking among ourselves. We have nothing to do with the investigation, but as investigators, everybody's interested, right? And you're looking at this, and you're thinking, this had to be pilot. There's really no other explanation that makes any sense. I'll give you, for example, you know, if it was a fire, Swiss Air was a fire. Fires do not go out on their own. Fires spread exponentially. If a fire starts and it's able to disable the transponder, think about it. When this guy said, "Good night, Malaysia," whatever he said there, "Good night, Malaysian 370," whatever he said. Famous words, I can't remember them. Anyway, his last transmission, it was less than 2 minutes later that the transponder went off. And I'm thinking, well, shit, I know some about fires, right? There's no way that a fire can start and in less than 2 minutes turn the transponder of the airplane off without the pilot knowing about it. And if he knew about it, then why didn't he tell somebody? You know, like that never made any sense to me. The other thing is, if the fire is of such intensity that it can burn through wiring, which takes minutes and minutes and minutes to burn through, it's very resistant to fire. If the fire is of that intensity, then how is it going to go out? And if it doesn't go out, you've got less than 20 minutes. You don't have 6 or 7 hours. You can't have a fire. If this building caught on fire, you think you'd have 6 or 7 hours? You might have 6 or 7 minutes, right?
You're right.
Yeah, no, it just can't happen. So you can dismiss fire right away. But some of the best investigators in the world, supposedly, on the official investigation team, are saying, well, it might be a fire. I say, no, it's not. Like, that's obvious. That is so incredibly obvious that it can't be a fire, that it's almost laughable. But they're throwing this out there as a possibility, and people still are. And then you look at you know, they were talking about hijackers. You say, well, it's the same thing. Remember, it's a minute and 10 or 15 seconds between nothing being wrong and everything going wrong, right? Now, do you think for 1 second, let's say you wanted to hijack that airplane, and it is a big airplane, you'd have to be in first class, you'd have to be right there by the door, right? And then you'd have to say, geez, I wonder if the pilot's going to come out right at the exact time it goes between that airspace and that airspace where nobody's going to notice him, you know? And he's going to open the door. And then I'm going to rush in there in the middle of the night. And I'm going to know enough to tell them to turn the transponder off or turn it off. That's not going to happen. That can't happen. Does that make any sense? No, it doesn't make any sense at all. So right off the bat, we know this is, you want to move on, don't you?
No, it's fine. I think the point has been well made, that it's peculiar circumstances that don't add up. So I want to get right into this drawing that you've provided of a plane.
Yeah.
Essentially the plane that was involved in this accident. Can you just lead us through a few pieces that are important to this investigation and why you determined what you believe to be?
I'm going to tell you the 2 pieces that are the most important. And this is sent to us by the aviation gods. They gave us two things. They gave us the pings, the handshakes that told them where the airplane basically went, to the general area where it went. They also gave us two pieces that are, if you wanted two pieces, other than the data recorders, if you wanted two pieces from that airplane to figure out what happened for sure, you would pick the two that we have. One is called the Laporan. You see that where it says Laporan right there? There's a section about the width of these two tables together, and it's a little flap that comes up and down at the back of the wing with the rest of the flaps. And right next to it, you see outboard flap. The 1/3 of that outboard flap, a section of that flap, also was dislodged during the ditching. We can say this, it was dislodged during the ditching. Those two pieces are the very bulk of the evidence that is in this book that proves what happened to this airplane. The reason that these pieces are so important, I'll explain that to you. If the airplane is flying along as they say it was, at high altitude with no pilot, and it runs out of fuel, and it goes down into the ocean in a high-speed dive, those two pieces that were recovered would be in the up position, retracted fully up. They would be tucked in behind the wing because you don't want them hanging down, making drag while you're going along, right? So they would be fully up. They would be streamlined into the airflow. They weren't. They were down. They were fully down. And this is what the book proves, along with many other things. Those two pieces, when they dislodged from this airplane, were fully extended down. Now, the only way that those pieces, that those flaps and that flap system could be extended is if somebody did that. They can't do it on their own. Doesn't happen with autopilot. Doesn't happen automatically when the airplane slows down. There is no other way than if Richard can tell you, you're sitting in the airplane, you got a switch there that says switch. You got a lever there that says flap. And the captain says flap down, and the co-pilot says, yes, sir. Down she goes. And down they come. And that's the only way. You have to move that. It's an intentional act. Not only that, to get those to move, the switch, the lever, is electronically connected. Electronically, you have to have electrics to a hydraulic system that actually moves them down. You have to have hydraulics. You know where those come from? The engines. The engines produce the electrics and the hydraulics. You can do it with a backup system of APU, but we don't need to go there. The engines were operating. It didn't run out of fuel. It didn't run out of fuel. It couldn't, because if it did, those things couldn't be down. Now, the official investigation, by the way, disagrees with me. They say that these things were up, retracted. They still hang to that. To this day, they say that. Unfortunately, they're wrong. They're very wrong. Those were down. And I don't know if we have time enough here for me to show you how I know they were down, but if you read the book, you'll become convinced.
Do we have pictures that actually show some evidence of that?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so we'll get to that.
Yeah, we'll get to that. If we have time, I can stay here all night.
That's okay. This again speaks to part of your theory is if it was, as the official investigation said, a nose-first high-impact crash, this is what Swiss Air looked like.
These are pieces from my personal collection. That on the top picture there, what you see is what we call the sort table. When we took 15 months of putting the parts and pieces from Swiss Air 111 onto this table, looking for materials that showed damage of fire, in particular wires, small wires that were ripped apart. But those on that particular table, there would be thousands of pieces. That's how you get to 2 million. You do that for 15 months. We'll show you the difference between this and the wreckage from Malaysia here in a minute. But the bottom pieces showed the same. Here are pictures of what we were just talking about. You see in the picture on the left, the flapper on in the up position, streamlined, right? And you see in the one on the right, the flaps are extended down. You see, the flapper on goes up and down on a hinge like this. The other ones are on the hinge, but they also go backwards like this when they go out. They back up some away from the wing, and then they go down. That's how they're and it's done with big hydraulic cylinders. Big hydraulic cylinders drive these things. But that's, yeah.
Do you know, I never knew it was called a flapper on, but I've flown enough. and I always look out the window and make sure that they move just as we're landing.
Yeah.
And they always do, so that's the good news.
It's a good idea for them to move.
It is.
Yes.
Here's a piece of wreckage. What is this, and what does this
That's
tell us?
that's the Laporan that was recovered that came to the shoreline in Africa. And if you notice a few things about that right off the top, first of all, it looks nothing like what we just saw in the wreckage from Swiss Air 111. In particular, if you look at the leading edge, see where it says leading edge there? That's what we call in the accident investigation world, that is called pristine. That is just about, I mean, it's a wreck, right? But it's perfect. It's got its full aerodynamic shape. It has its full aerodynamic shape at the leading edge, goes all the way around like it should. It has its full aerodynamic shape on the top and on the bottom, and it's pristine. It did not go through a crash into water at high speed. It simply did not. Can you imagine that? You work it out mathematically. That piece there from the front to the back would be destroyed by the impact that they're talking about in 4/100ths of a second. That's how long it would take for that to be destroyed. Do you think that any person in their right mind would look at that piece of wreckage and say that went through that kind of an impact? It just didn't happen. It couldn't happen. There's a depiction of what they say happened to the airplane. That's not what happened to the airplane. But in the book, there's a great description of the airplane breaking apart into 2 million pieces as it progresses down into the water. It doesn't go below the surface. Like I've seen television shows where you see the airplane diving down like a whale or something. I mean, it doesn't even get 2 feet into the. I mean, there's a great big splash, but it does not penetrate into the water. It comes apart at the surface, and it goes zip in a blink of an eye, and it's gone. It's gone. Simple as that. That's what happens to it. Now, this one here is the back. You can concentrate here on the back edge, the trailing edge of this flaperon. And you see the damage back there. The front edge is pristine, right? It's got a nice smooth round, no damage, nothing. The back end is all eaten away. It looks like somebody got hungry and just chewed it away, right? It's all eroded, what we call erosion. It's now, I think that most people in here could figure out pretty quickly how you could get erosion on the back of that, right? If it's down. You can't get erosion if it's up. But if it's down, and that huge friggin' airplane is skimming along the surface of the water, and that thing there is water's coming here and being forced down around the end of it, the bottom of it, it's just like a hydraulic, it's gone. And it stayed there long enough, a few seconds is all it would take to erode that from the back end. You know, unless this airplane was backing up, you can't get damage on the trailing edge. Like, who wouldn't, I don't mean to be sarcastic, but who wouldn't know that? Who wouldn't know that?
So Larry, here's where we're going to go here.
Yeah.
I want you to discuss how you believe the plane ended up in the water.
Yeah.
And we'll bring out the paper airplanes.
Yeah.
And if I watched your demonstration well enough earlier today, I'll take this side of the room, you take that side, you do the talking.
We'll do it.
And I hope I won't make a mistake.
Okay.
So we only have a few of these. So those of you who don't have one, you're going to have to maybe just watch the demonstration here of how this happened.
Yeah. First of all, before we start into that, let me just tell you how this airplane in fact entered the water. I better go through that.
Sure. Let's do it.
Just so people have a really good idea. This airplane was set up in a ditching. The landing gear was left up. You don't want the landing gears down. The intention here is to get this thing onto the water surface with the least possible damage, so that it's going to sink to the bottom all in one piece, never to be seen again. In the part of the world, it's the most remote part of the world, to try and find it. And remember that this guy didn't even know there was these pings and handshakes. He was taking it to, if that hadn't happened, it could have been on the moon as far as, but we know that it's in that part of the ocean. Now to carry out the rest of his plan, he wants it to disappear without anything coming off of it to float to the. Luckily, he wasn't able to do that, right? But because a few pieces came off, and the two critical ones that we need. Anyway, he's coming in. He's about 140 knots. The engines are running. He puts the flaps down. The flaps, and then he comes down to the water. the engines meet the water. They're on the bottom. They're hung down. They would disappear. Boom, they're gone. They break off. They're designed to break off in a ditching. They're the first thing that happens. The next thing that happens is all these flaps and this Laporan hanging down are the next thing to hit. Skip, 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 and all this erosion happens. We'll show it to you on the flap too, the flap piece. Same idea. The airplane then comes down. The right wing goes into a swell or a wave. And you can ask me how I know it's the right wing. I know it's the right wing because I prove it in the book. The right wing goes down. The right wing catches in the water and starts to get held back. There's drag out here on the right wing. And there's a compression load, what do you call compression, you know, along the trailing edge of this. If you take that, we're going to show you with this airplane here. If you take this and force it back, there's a compression along here that happens. These things, all these pieces here, all these flaps are in different sections. And they're separated by little spaces so they don't hit each other in the air. When the compression happens, they all get smushed together in the down position. And they leave what we call witness marks. Witness marks. Witness marks means if you take something and hit it, if I take this and I squish it like this and it stays there, that's a witness mark right there. And if I hit something else into it, if I were to take that and smash that together, it might make a hole in here. That's part of a witness mark. It would show the damage on here. And if I match up those two pieces, then I know that's kind of the theory of a witness mark. So we looked at witness marks and so on. But this compression on the back of the wing left these witness marks. And there's way more than we would ever be able to talk about. There's way more than I even have in the book. But the important ones are all in the book to show you how we know for absolute certainty that the flaps were down. If the flaps were down, what does that mean? It means somebody did it. Somebody did it intentionally. They landed on the water intentionally, which tells me that the conclusion is that this pilot did it all intentionally. That's where we are. Now we can go into these little pieces here.
Sure. Stand up and maybe just take it to your side of the house, and I'll go to mine, and we'll try to explain this.
I cut these out this morning. Fine work. Yeah. I don't know what you're going to be able to see from back there. One of the important things to understand is this airplane is going along on the water. Take this airplane and you can put it flat on the surface. If you just put your finger on the tip of the right wing like this, out here, and you make the airplane keep going along like this. You see what happens to the wing? There's compression back here and it starts to fold up. See that? You see that? I'll show you over here. If you take this,
the back of the room
you put this here, and you make that go like that, the wing folds up. That's because there's compression here. This is trying to force this wing into here, but it won't go. And it's trying to rip it out from up here, but it's got enough. It goes up like that. The wing is not as delicate as this. This paper airplane, if you take this and hold it down to simulate the rigidity that's in the wing, and you do the same thing, you'll find what happens is that it starts to go in a wave pattern at the back. Some of them go up and some of them go down, right? It doesn't just go all the way up like that. The rigidity makes it go up and down like that. Now, there's sufficient evidence.
You may have to come to this side. I feel there's been a disservice on this side of the room.
Okay, well, I can certainly go there. I can show you something. I'll show something on this side I didn't show over here just to make up for it. Yeah. I knew I shouldn't have had that big supper.
We had a good dinner.
Oh, my, we went to an Italian place. Wow.
Anthony's got a good little plug.
Oh, geez, that was good. That is a good spot. No, what I was showing over there is if you take this and you put your finger here, like it would be if there was resistance here. If there was resistance here from the water, and you make the airplane keep going, which it would, what happens is that the back of the wing goes up like this. See? If you hold it, because it's paper, you have to hold it to simulate the rigidity that's in the wing. If you do the same thing, it makes folds up and down. It goes like a ripple like this. Okay? You can do that once you get the book. It explains how to do it. It's really fun.
Although I will say, when I read the book, I thought we were going to be actually throwing airplanes tonight. I didn't realize we had to cut them out. But anyway.
Yeah, well, that would cause confusion. The other thing that I'm going to show this side, pay attention over here because I'm going to show something new. If you take this wing If you don't have the resistance from this wing being attached to the fuselage, none of this compression buckling back here can happen. If you take that wing and remove the resistance here, and you do the same thing, all that's going to happen is there's nothing going to happen here. There's going to be no compression here at all. None. There's no compression, nothing holding it together. If you had a high-speed crash into the water, as they described, and the water invades up in here, one of the things that's going to happen is that there's not going to be anything left for this wing to be attached to. Right? If there's nothing for the wing to be attached to, you don't have any compression back here. Can't happen. Physically, that's physics. Law of physics. Nobody can say that the law of physics didn't apply to this airplane. It did. So there's about 1,000 reasons that we know this was not a high-speed crash like they say it is. That one there is pretty convincing all by itself, and that's just a small little part. You try and explain that to the official investigation.
You actually reached out to the official investigation to offer your help.
Yeah, but you know what? They were not receptive, and there's good reason for that. I'm a consultant now. I used to be one of them. We used to be what we call the white hat guys, Richard? We were always the white hat guys. We were the good guys. We had no bias. We had no skin in the game. That was us. We were government paid. And we didn't care one way or the other. The evidence points us in the right direction. Now I'm what we call a black hat guy. I'm not, but I'm considered. I'm a consultant. I work for lawyers, and you know what? There's any lawyers in here? Anyway, I work in litigation. So automatically I'm on one side or the other. So I have skin in the game, right? And they are not supposed to, almost by law, they're not supposed to associate with people like me because they don't want to be biased by somebody with some kind of a financial. I have no client in this. We're on our own here. It's all gratis. But and you don't make much money selling books either, I can tell you that.
That's a hint. If you would like to purchase a book tonight, you can. Here's a picture of the recovered portion of the outboard flap.
Right.
How does this play into what the story that you've told us to this point?
Right. Now, this piece of flap is the piece that's next to the flaperon. They're side by each. Isn't it a coincidence that there's only 20 pieces from this airplane that were ever recovered that were identified? 2 of them were side by each, and they were flaps, pieces from the flap system. Do you think those 2 pieces would have been the only 2 pieces that came off if the thing went in 2 million pieces? That don't make any sense. The reason they came off is because they were down, and that's where all the pressure was, trying to take, and then you hit the right wing in and produce all this compression, and the combination of the water pressure against these things as they're being pulled through the water and the compression breaks these things off. That makes sense. That's how they get broken off. Because, and you see here where it shows the gaps between the 2. That outboard flap over there where it says end plate on the outboard flap, that piece that was recovered, and the flapper on there was recovered. And there's a gap about that much. And between them they have what they call, what do they call that stuff, Richard? Rub strips. Rub strips. There's rub strips, and you can't see them, but they're in there. And what they do is they just fill that gap to make it aerodynamically so that there's not a gap there to make whistles and all the rest of it. And it's made out of more pliable material. Anyway, there's gaps between the 2. And therefore, there's an opportunity, if there's compression along the back of that wing, for those things to be rammed together. You can't get ramming together. I broke my airplane. You can't get ramming together.
Here you go. Here's one that's fully
intact.
intact.
Thank you very much. I can use this one.
That's even
I've
better.
got to break this one. No, you can't get ramming together. You can't get compression along the back of that wing ever in a high-speed diving crash. Can't happen. Physically can't happen. In 1/3 of a second, in 4/100ths of a second, there's just not enough time to do that. Can't happen. So if we can prove that there was compression there, then we know that right wing hit. And we know that couldn't happen in a high-speed diving crash. We know it couldn't. Now let's look at what do we got here. This is the end plate on that piece of that is is that section of flap. And this is what we're looking at here is the piece that was next to the flaperon. And you can't see it from here, but that whole thing is pushed in. It's compressed in. We'll show you pictures of that after if we get time. You see where it says large crack and small crack? Those are what they call compression cracks. They're easy to read, especially for the guys like my partner Terry, who's been doing this. And I think he wrote the book on it. I think he was doing this before they invented metal. And those are compression fractures that can only happen if you ram that flaperon, which is the only thing next to it, into it. See where it says black smudge marks? There's a V shape there that runs down to a kind of a point and then back. That's the trailing edge of that flaperon. That was caused when the two things rammed together. The position of that could only be there if the flaps were down. You can't get that in that position if the flaps are up. There's subtleties about that. There's little parts at the end that are hard to see here, but there's a little run out in there that proves that happened. Anyway, we can move on.
Sure.
That's the inside of the small crack from inside that piece of flap. You see where up on the right side there it says small crack in the end plate viewed from outside? That's the view from the inside. You see how it's punctured? It's not punctured. That's just compression. It looks like it could be punctured, but it's not. That's a compression fracture that's pushed in that proves that compression was taking place along the trailing edge of that flap. Go ahead. Yeah, here's where we were going to do this. We got ahead of ourselves.
That's okay.
But
Still works.
That span-wise force, the span-wise force and the chord-wise force, span-wise force cannot happen in a high-speed diving crash in 1/3 of a second. Physics just can't allow that to happen. Doesn't happen. Now, you could say, just in case there's some people in here that are getting ahead of me, it would be possible for an airplane to crash with the right wing down like this at high speed. That's not impossible. But there's all kinds of similar physical evidence to prove that it didn't crash with the right wing down. It crashed level. I don't know if we'll be able to get to it tonight, but hopefully we will. But I can show you positive evidence that it didn't crash with the right wing down at high speed. It crashed with the wings level. Go ahead.
We're going to get to all your pictures, so if
then
that
we'll get
allows
there.
you to do it,
then we'll get
be
there
fine.
if we don't run out of time first.
We're good.
Okay. Yeah, this right here shows the two pieces that came together. It's really hard when you're writing a book. Maybe Jamie can tell you to get pictures that you can actually use when you're trying to sell the book. Like you got to have the rights to it. You can't just take somebody's picture off the internet or whatever. Oh my, what a piece of work that is, trying to get validation that you can use all these pictures. So I had to use pictures that weren't necessarily the best pictures that were available, but the ones that I could get rights to. So that is on the top picture there, where it's pointing from the top of the arrow. That's the rub strips. See, they look like kind of vinyl or something.
That's right on the top here, right?
Yeah, that's the rub
here?
strips.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's that black mark on the bottom is where those rub strips were compressed into the one down below. Yeah, there's better pictures of that somewhere, but anyway, that's the two pieces that hit together. Yeah, you can see the lower rub strip and the upper rub strip on the upper left-hand side. See where one is longer than the other? Yeah, you see the one right below it? You see the corresponding black mark there where one stops and the other one keeps going a little bit? See where it says narrow trail of smudge? That corresponds to that top picture where the upper rub strip is longer than the bottom one, right? You can see that. Like nobody can deny that that's there. I didn't make that up. I didn't draw it. That's pictures that came directly from the wreckage that was recovered, right? This is how the airplane, the wing is, the flap is attached to the wing. There's two what they call canoes under there. Those things are called canoes, and they enclose the big jack screws, or not, they're not screws in this case. They're hydraulic jacks that bring that flap piece up and down. And the recovered flap section is the part on the inside, the 1/3, just inside that inside canoe, right there. The seal pan is down there. inside this piece of flap that was recovered, inside that what are we looking at there? Oh yeah, that in there, down on the very end, next to the flaperon, there's another piece that stabilizes that big flap. It's long. It's like 20 or 30 feet long or something. It's a big monstrous thing. And there's only two places where it's connected that drive it up and down on these hydraulic jacks. So down on the ends, they don't want it going like this, eh? So they put this support structure in there inside that what they call seal pan down on the end. And all it does is stabilize. What happens is that they have this great big arm that's fastened. If I'm the airplane and the airplane's going this way, I got this great big arm that goes down inside there, and the flap goes up and down, and this arm stays attached to the strut on the back of the wing, and the thing goes up and down, and on here there's a canoe, or not a canoe, a carrier, a structural piece that's attached to the flap at that point, and it just rides up and down and provides stability there to take away vibration at the end of that flap. If you want to know whether the flaps are up or the flaps are down, then you should really look and see if you can find witness marks to tell you that when this thing was ejected from the airplane, was it up or was it down? They never did that. If they did, they never told anybody. On the official investigation, they never did that. See that hole right there in the front of that? That's the flap piece. That's the seal pan end plate. The big arm that I have here, that's the hole for it in the front. It has to go in and out of there somehow, so they put a big hole in the front, right? And in the air, it's no problem because it's down in behind the wing. There's no air gets in there or anything. But that's all distorted. It's all distorted because that's how the big arm came out from inside. If this flap piece had been all the way up, that arm would have been all the way inside. All the way in there. And remember, the airplane is going along front ways. In order for that to get out, the flap has to be going relatively backwards, and the airplane has to be going relatively frontwards. Right? The airplane is going frontwards. There's no way that can get out from way inside there unless it's actually not backwards, but it's slower than what it is the flap is being drug in the water, creating the pressure to force that flap to go back, and when the thing broke, it came out the front. How in the world could you do that? If you're taking this airplane in 1/3 of a second in a high-speed dive, it can't get out of there. It can't get out. It has to go, oh yeah. And that's what it would sound like.
That was intentional, of course,
yeah.
just to kind of make sure you were paying attention.
And I can do the water part too if you want.
I know we're getting into more technical terms here. I will give Larry credit. He did a wonderful job of putting this book into layman terms. I completely understood as I read it. So where are we at?
Well, anyway, I think that's relatively simple. To tell you the truth, I think that it's relatively easy to understand that you can't have something going forward at 380 knots and have one piece of it go backwards in 1/3 of a second to pull it out from there and not make any damage to the leading edge of that piece. Like, I don't think that it takes very technical mind to be able to figure that out. That's not hard. It's not hard. Go try it with your car sometime. You figure it out. You know?
Anything here? Do we move on from here?
No, there's no. Well, you can see the damage around there that was caused. Yeah, no, we can move on from here.
Okay, some more smaller
down
pictures.
inside that seal pan. This is getting a little technical, so I'll go through it quite quick. Down inside that seal pan, there are dents and damages. If you read the official report, I'm sure you haven't bored yourself enough to read the official report. If you read the official report, what they say in there is because there is damage inside that seal pan, where this big arm is, there's damage in there. They can see it. I agree. There's lots of damage in there. They say because there's damage in there, the only way that could happen is if the flap was all the way up because this arm had to be in there. It makes a certain amount of sense. The arm had to be in there. I agree that it was in there, and it was all the way in there at one point. But what they failed to recognize is how the flap actually, that flap piece was actually detached from the airplane. What happened was that these big arms over here, and we can show you that, when the compression happened and so on, they're the ones that gave up first. They're the ones that let go. And when they did, the flap went up because of all the water pressure went up. Inside this seal pan, the flap started all the way down, and the arm, the big track arm, was not in there. Inside there, there's damage where you can see that some of the damage was caused when the flap was going down or being pulled aft, and some of it happened when the flap was going up. There's damage in two different directions. Absolutely, damage. You can see it with your own eyes. If you won't see it here. If you read the book, you can see that damage with you. Can you go back up one there?
Yeah.
You can see that in there, that on some of these little pieces in here, there's damage definitely where that flap was going in two different directions. Well, at one point it was going up, and at one point it was in, and at one point it was going the other way. That can't happen in 4/100ths of a second. You can't have anything in physics that goes two different directions at the same time. It can't happen. So we know that what happened was, and I'll skip by this part pretty quick, when the flap let go, it was flailing. All this stuff doesn't line up. There's not supposed to be any damage in there. The thing goes up and down. Nothing touches. You can see that it went over the up position. There's a spot in there, I don't know if we'll get to it, where you can see where the end of that rod went into a place in the back of that, in the front of that flap, where it's not even supposed to be able to go that far. But it was going in two different directions, and that's how it happened. Let's go on. You see this piece here? This is very important. This bent and broken push-pull rod. This is where the flap connects to the wing by the big, under the canoe. These are massive big, or they're not that big. They are massively strong to hold that flap to the airplane, and they're massively strong to hold on to it. When it finally let go, you see where it says bent and broken push-pull rod, you see the angle that's on? I think there's another picture of that coming next. But right here. See how that's bent? That's bent in. It didn't break off straight. It bent. You know why it bent that way? Because of the compression load that it was under. A tremendous amount of compression load along the trailing edge of that wing. Yeah, you can't get that in a high-speed diving crash. We've already talked about that. That by itself is, when we did this, where we saw the wing, when we held it, it did the wave. When the wave happened, when that piece broke, we know which direction that it was bent, that part of the wing. It was bent so that it caused that overlapping gouging. It was bent down. And the overlapping gouging that you see there happened on the top of the wing. See, what happened was that the piece, I can do it with this, the piece broke off, and when it broke off, it went together this way on the top of the wing. If it had been down this way, there wouldn't have been any of that gouging. Couldn't happen. I know some of this might be going over your head, but it had to have happened because it was being squished together. And we know it was in a down compression. If you want to get real technical, the other end was in an up compression. And there's proof of this that you needn't bother yourself with, but there's proof of it. Oh, right there. See where it says impact witness mark from the contact with support end aft? That mark there was made by the end of this arm, which comes down to a point. Do you think that the official investigation said anything about that? Nothing. And they won't even tackle it today. Nobody has forced them into explaining their version of how that mark was made. In the accident investigation, that's not right. That is not right, that they should be able to get away with that. Shouldn't happen. This is one that convinces me. This is the most important one for me. I know that because my background, I can understand it. If the flaps were up, as they would be on the left right there, see where it says stiffener locations? Now, if we agree that there was this massive compressive load, and we have to agree because you saw the evidence yourself, there's a massive compressive load on the tail, on the trailing edge of this wing. The stiffener's in there. See where the flap is there? There's 3 stiffeners right there. If the compression load had been in there, there would have been witness marks, definitive witness marks at those 3 locations. We would see them. Now we look on the bottom where it says no evidence of damage due to contact with the stiffeners. You don't see any damage. There's no compression there. If we had time, we could look inside and you would see there's no compression at that point. There's no witness marks at that point. Now, what does Mother Nature tell you as far as witness marks are concerned where those flaps were? That by itself proves that the flaps were down. If you had nothing else, you could rely on that. The flaps were down, absolutely. This is particularly important. Trying to choose which piece of evidence is the most compelling, to me, is like trying to choose your favorite child. There are so many, none of which were covered by the official investigation. You see where those red marks are there? Those are pieces that were recovered. Only 20 pieces were recovered, or there might be up to 30, but there's 20, we'll say, that they identified. Those pieces come from right there, right in front of the Laporan. Those two pieces came from the Laporan. And I can tell you, I will skip real quick here, how that happened. When the Laporan was being forced up, the structure that holds the Laporan against that force is right below these pieces of wing structure here. And they popped off. They couldn't withstand the pressure. Do you think there's any chance that if 2 million pieces of airplane or tens of thousands of pieces of airplane, let's just go back there for a second. Do you think there's any chance with tens of thousands of pieces of wreckage out there that two of them that would make it to shore would be those two pieces? Like the odds of that are you can't say zero, but they're zero. There is zero chance that those two pieces would be, just by coincidence, two pieces that came off by a high-speed diving crash. No, and then everything else sank and went to no, those two pieces. The reason that they came there is because those were the two pieces that were created by the ditching event. And there's good and valid physical reason and logic why they would be the ones that were created. These are pieces from inside. The official investigation, I know what happened. These guys are looking at those and they say they look like Swiss Air. They do. They do look like Swiss Air. They're small little pieces. And they say this proves that there's 2 million more of those out there somewhere. Not the case. Not the case. No, what happened was when this airplane went into the water with the right wing, there was such compression along here that this piece over here gave way. This went into the fuselage without a doubt, because you had to get into the fuselage in order to let stuff out. Where it happened, the most logical place for it to happen is right here. There was a hole punctured in here by the back of this wing. I think that this wing came off. If it didn't come off, it's dangling, right? It's holding on up here. I think it came off. I think it hit the tail because we have some tail structure pieces. But it definitely made a hole in here. And these things here are from the damage. There'd be a lot of damage. You take an airplane that weighs 300-some thousand pounds, and you push that wing into that fuselage. It's not meant to go in there. I mean, there's no, but there's really no structure to stop it. This airplane is not built to take a force like that. It just simply went in there and made a hole, and out came these few pieces. And there's even more pieces that have been discovered lately, and those pieces came out the same way. This door up here, there's a piece from this door up here. That door came open. The distortion in the fuselage up here would be sufficient to pop that door. When the nose finally came down into the water, that door opened without a doubt, and that piece from the door came off. That's how you explain the small pieces. It's not because there's 2 million of them. There's a good and logical explanation for every one of them. If this is a picture that they had and we modified. This is every single piece except one of that airplane that was recovered. Every single one of them can be explained by a low-speed ditching event. Every single one of them. The right-hand horizontal stabilizer, that goes into the water in low speed. I think the right wing hit that. The flapper, of course, the outboard flap, the flap support fairing, the right wing trailing edge panel. Look at how many pieces there are from the flap system that are among the 20 that were recovered. Engine cowl, we know the engines were knocked off. The landing gear door in the front, that would be knocked off. There's only a very few pieces from inside the airplane. All the rest of them can be explained by a low-speed ditching event. You would expect to see pieces like that. The pilot was thinking there would be nothing, right? And nothing certainly that would float from way out in the ocean to Africa. He didn't dream about that in all his planning. He wouldn't have dreamed that. But those two pieces, let's just back up one sec. I know we're getting in a hurry here maybe. But those pieces, what I say in the book, if you have what they say you have, which is tens of thousands of floating debris, let's say that we could go out there magically and find the 20 pieces that would eventually end up in Africa, and we're going to mark them somehow. We can identify them. And they're in among thousands. And then we wait for months and months and months and months. What do you think the odds are that the only 20 pieces among those thousands that would make it to the Africa shore would be the ones that are connected with a low-speed ditching? Like, the odds of that are zero, right? The odds of that are zero. It can't happen. Like, there would be suitcases and neck supports and luggage and all kinds of, in Swiss Air we had tens of thousands of pieces. We had 15,000 pounds of airplane floating with Swiss Air 111. We didn't have 20 pieces that can all be associated with a ditching event. This is the rings that...
Is this the satellite data? Yeah.
This is the satellite data. And there's no need to get into this. I have great respect for the people who did those calculations to do that. That was amazing work. Those electronic connections are not meant to track airplanes, and they did it, and I applaud them fully. Where they got in trouble is they went beyond their level of capability, and they tried to determine from those pings that the airplane was in a rate of descent, and it was just a dog's breakfast. They got that so wrong. They were way over their heads with that. And the investigation people were egging them on, saying that this was a high-speed dive, wasn't it? Because they had already decreed to the world that it was. And they spent $100 and some million looking for the airplane, and without good reason for where they were looking. No wonder they wanted it like that. Anyway, yeah, that's the... I don't know why these come in this order, but anyway, that's where they turned around. Right on the border, they went across there, they went up between the two. What the guy was doing was trying to avoid attracting attention from the military radars, because even though they couldn't find him electronically, they still have the old-fashioned echo from the airplane. Nobody looks for that. But anyway, they found it later on because it's recorded. We can go on.
Same thing.
Same thing, we just passed that. That's the cockpit. These are the search zones. What they did was, as we explained at the very beginning, they ran the airplane out of fuel, calculated where it would run out of fuel. They asked Boeing to say what would happen when the airplane runs out of fuel. Guess what? It goes down. And it goes out of control. It goes into a high speed, and it goes into the ocean in a high speed dive. They had, the only justification they had for where to look was that they had to run the airplane out of fuel. If they left the arbitrariness, is that a word, of the pilot being able to take it wherever he wanted to within reason after he got down there, they would have no rationale for where to actually search for the airplane. That would not have been a good move on their part to not search for the airplane. Like, they had to search, and they had to have a logic for where to search. I can see how that could happen. We're putting in all kinds of stressors on to say, what would happen if they said, well, geez, we don't know where to look. And there's so many amateurs out there on the internet. My God, there's some incredible people that spend their lives, I don't know if they have lives, but they go into this stuff in huge amount of detail, and they challenge the official investigation to say, well, we know where the airplane is. You've seen it. We know where the airplane is. It's on this ridge somewhere in here and there, and they know, and they put themselves in the mind of the pilot even. Some people say, well, this is what the pilot must have did if he did it. He would have thought this and he would have thought that. I don't do that in the book. It's not my place to do that. But anyway, that's how they figured out the logic of where to look, and that's why they're kind of anti-me at this point, because I'm telling them that, you know what, this wasn't all that good of a plan. You know?
But the plane has not been found.
The plane has not been found. There were people in those. They did an investigation, the official search, investigation and search, and they were pretty confident that they had zeroed in on the area where the airplane was, and they did some amazing searching. Holy jeez, they had some of the best technology, and they never found the airplane. And I kind of behind the scenes contacted them and said, yeah, I don't think you're going to find the airplane. Go away. And then they gave up on that because they ran out of money and enthusiasm. But then this American company, what do you call it? The Ocean Infinity, they decided they were going to throw a bunch of money at it. And God bless them. But they went to the official investigation and they gave them all this same stuff, and that's where they started from. And then they had their own experts calculate an even finer degree. I mean, years are now passing, right? And they say, whoa, now we got our, we've refined our capability of doing this satellite stuff. But it's all still based on the same wrong theory, that the airplane ran out of fuel. They had a starting point. And I say the airplane didn't run out of fuel, and the pilot took it arbitrarily down near the end of where he was down there. He went somewhere else. Not intentionally. He didn't know there was any pings or handshakes. He didn't know that this stuff was all going to be figured out later on. He figured he's home free. Nobody knows where he went. Nobody knows which part of the world he went to. I mean, if somebody wants to speculate that he's in China or Kazakhstan or somewhere, that's all well and good, but he can't do that because of those handshakes and so on. But anyway, they zeroed in, and they were so confident that they said, we're going to have this airplane recovered or found within days or weeks or something. I said, no, they're not. And sure enough, after quite a few months and quite a few million more dollars, they gave up.
I still got a few more pictures, but I think we've covered most of these, right? Larry, anything
Yeah,
more
we
to
don't
be
need
said
to go.
about
Well,
this?
that just shows the good condition of it again. We don't need to go through all that.
That actually is the last slide.
Oh, that's the last one? Oh,
It
that's
is.
too bad.
So just a couple of things to wrap
Yeah.
up here. You believe that this plane is at the bottom of the Indian Ocean and essentially is intact.
I believe that the airplane is just like I have it here. The engines are separate, but relatively in that same place. This wing is probably off, so that makes 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces. I believe the airplane is in basically 4 pieces. The fuselage is intact. Everybody who was in the airplane is still in there. They're all sitting on the bottom of the ocean waiting to be discovered. And I don't think that there's any doubt. I was asked one time what my level of confidence was, and something that we never did, Richard, ever. I said, I think that I have a level of confidence of 100%. And you never say that when you're in the government, else you get shot. But I've long since retired, and if I think that something is 100%, I'm going to say it's 100%. And this evidence that we see is 100% real. None of it's made up. You might disagree with my interpretation of it, but if you do, you're wrong. And I don't say that. I'm not that kind of guy. But the guys I work with, the people I work with, one guy and one girl, they're experts. And if you've been around this business for a long, long time, you know this evidence is solid. And it's not that hard. It's really disappointing that the official investigation and all the expertise they had from all over the world never even tackled this. I defy you to go on the internet and find any of this. You won't find it, except in my book.
Larry, a couple of things. You talked to me earlier today about the fact that when you were leading investigations, you never liked it when someone else on the outside, on the periphery, would question your investigation.
Right.
And now you're doing it in this
Yeah.
investigation.
Yeah, I am.
You've put yourself out there.
I did, and it's not quite right by me to do that. But you know what? After you see this stuff for such a long time, where my motivation for writing the book was, I felt like if I didn't write it, nobody was going to. Because at this stage of the game, and Richard knows how humble I am. Richard, don't you? You can tell them after. I think if I didn't do it, nobody else in the world would do it. And that's honest to God truth. Because I have the right combination of experience and expertise. I'm old enough and I'm wise enough, and I don't care what somebody else might come back to me. I get emails like you wouldn't believe. But before I pass on to wherever I'm headed, I needed to put this down in an organized fashion, because I tried to do it verbally. I tried to pass it on, and I couldn't get past first base. I still can't, 5 years later. And the people who read my book, who actually take the time to read the book, I haven't had a single person come back and disagree with it. And it's sold quite well, actually, all over the world. And the feedback that I get The only feedback I get in a negative way is from people who haven't read the book. And I have gotten to the point now where I have told people, I'm not going to talk to you until I'm guaranteed that you've read the book. Because how do you put all this stuff into a 2-minute exchange? You know, somebody says, well, how do you know that it wasn't a fire? And you say, oh, not again, no. And you can head into a little bit of an explanation, and it's going, zippo, zippo. And I say, you know what, go read the book. And then if you still think it's a fire, come back to me and tell me where I'm wrong. And come back to me and show me why those 2 little pieces from the top of the wings that we talked about, tell me how that could happen if it hit in a spiral dive with the wing down first. Can't happen. Like, all of these things are so interconnected that it took 18 months and a huge amount of hard work to put it all together in an understandable way that people like yourselves, God bless you, will be able to understand it. That's a lot of work to do that, to try and translate. I could do it in short order to people who know. Like, I could convince Richard, I already did. He just got here. No, in no time at all. You know, that this physical evidence is actually factual.
Larry,
Yeah.
I have to wrap up
Yeah.
with 2 more questions, but one of them is, you feel you're 100% right,
Right.
on that this was a criminal act, it was intentional, and it was not a nosedive, high-speed crash. If you believe that, there were investigators from, I believe, 6 countries involved in this. Why did they get it so wrong?
The official investigation had investigators from 6 countries, and they also had expertise from Boeing and the engine manufacturer and various other experts from all over the world, the very best of the best. This is high profile. This is not low profile stuff. This is high profile. And they got it wrong. And I haven't come up with, in my own mind, how much of it has to do with basic, I'll call it incompetence. Basic incompetence, that they don't have enough expertise to be able to read this evidence, to first of all identify it, and then to read it, and then to write about it, and then support it. They don't have that expertise. And the other aspect to it, on some sliding scale, is an intentional, deception is a hard word to use, but there's an intentional intent to say, we cannot put this forward from the official investigation because it's not politically correct. That it would put blame on an individual in the cockpit who we do not want to create bad relations with Malaysia or whoever, whatever. I'm not into politics, but somehow or other, on some scale, there's incompetence and an intent to deceive. And those are strong words, and I don't mean that these are mean and nasty people, and I don't think that there's any one individual who is to blame for this. I think there was a herd mentality. I think that there's some very, very, very smart people who figured out this satellite stuff. I mean, I couldn't hold a candle to these guys when it comes to that kind of brain power. I mean, geez, they would just talk their way around me. And then I would say, yeah, but what about these 2 pieces on the top of the wing? And then they wouldn't know what I was talking about. But these people took control and overwhelmed the investigation. And they decided really early on that this had to have been a high-speed dive. And everything they looked at after that was a high-speed dive. Yes, sir. Yeah, those pieces mean it was a high-speed dive. No, they mean exactly the opposite. But I don't want to hear that. Don't want to see it.
Okay, my final question. We've all been told that flying is the safest thing one can do. There were 239 people on board this plane. They had no idea what was ahead of them. What can we take away from this around airplane safety?
First of all, I fly a lot still. I used to be a pilot, but now I retired, so I rely on younger people than me to fly me around. And I have absolutely no hesitation. I have no hesitation sending my family on board an airplane. Every once in a while you get turbulence and one of them will get sick or something, but there's no danger to it at all. It's more danger, you know, I mean, it's a cliche. There's more danger for me driving back to the hotel. And if you're walking, there's more danger to you. But the fact is that there is nothing that I have been able to figure out to prevent, at this stage, there's really nothing to prevent a rogue pilot from doing what this guy did. The same thing could happen tomorrow. If you put somebody in charge of the airplane. There's no way that you can then say to them, no, you're not really in charge. We're going to take over. You can't do it. If you're in charge, you're in charge. If you decide that you want to take charge, you've got a door where nobody can get in. If you can figure out a way to eliminate the other person in the cockpit, which is not that hard to do, you got control. And I was saying earlier, if you think about it, it's the same thing when you get in a bus. If the bus driver decides he wants to aim at the side of a bridge somewhere, unexpectedly, and you're in the bus, well, good luck. I mean, there's nothing to stop an individual. If a doctor decides to go rogue during your operation, oh, goodbye. I mean, it's human. It's just a human failure. And we were talking about what the fix could be, and people think, okay, let me think outside the box. We could give control to somebody on the ground. What if that person is cuckoo? Where do you stop? If you put artificial intelligence in, the person who designs the artificial intelligence could be putting a line of code in there that says, okay, on the 4th day of 2000 and whatever, crash. I know that sounds a little absurd, but if you really think about it, we rely on the goodness of people's hearts, and we don't see this very often. It happens, and when it happens, it makes big news. But I wouldn't put one single thought into it's going to happen to me. It's not going to happen to me or you or anybody in this room for 1,000 years.
I'm going to leave it there because you've brought us to a happy place, which I was a little bit worried we weren't going to get there.
No. I don't mean to scare anybody. I travel as much as anybody in this room. I guarantee you, and I have no hesitation.
And I agree with you. I don't have any hesitation getting on a plane either. All right. Thank you, Larry Vance, for a very, very compelling story. Thank you.
It's been fun. Thank you.